What's going on, all of our brain on Gotties, our beautiful baby boggies? Welcome to part one of our two-part series on fear.
Episode 9.
Episode 9. This is Aaron.
And this is Daryl.
And we are so excited for this series, guys. Today, we are going to be talking about the biological, psychological, what is actually happening in your brain in regards to fear, the response in your body, and how that knowledge of knowing what's actually happening in your brain can help you uncover those things and step out of fear into new life and seeing new things grow. Super excited for the episode. Make sure you subscribe to our iTunes, podcast, Spotify, YouTube, Your Brain on God, Instagram. Enjoy the episode. Peace out.
Oh,
yeah. Ahoy, sailors! Welcome,
hey there, mateys.
Welcome to episode 9 of Your Brain on God. My goodness. It's episode 9, which means we are only one episode away from being completely average podcasters. And we're so excited to get into this episode.
One episode from average.
We're actually doing something different, guys, this week. Well, kind of different. Well, I don't know. We're doing it's going to be the same. Basically, the different thing that we're doing is that it's going to be exactly the same.
Yes, it's going to be the same thing twice. Yeah. That's why it's different.
We are starting a 2-part series. We feel like cool podcasters, they do series, you know? And we feel like we wanted to join in the mix of that because this podcast isn't about giving wisdom. It's not about fun. It's not about just creativity. It's all about looking and sounding cool.
Cool.
At least from what I've gathered from these first 8 episodes, I feel my ego rising as we get to do these episodes.
Totally. That's what it feels like. And the more I do it, the more I discover its true purpose.
Which is to make us feel better about ourselves.
Feel cool, at least.
At least, yeah.
At least feel cool. Yeah.
Because the thing is, guys, the perception of cool is all that you need. It's the perception of cool. When I went into 6th grade, I thought that having a rolly backpack was cool. Because I thought it was cool. When I got to 6th grade, I found out very quickly that having a rolly backpack was not cool. And that's not something you should do. If you have a rolly backpack, good on you. But I found out that was, at least in my middle school, that wasn't cool to have a rolly backpack.
So you felt cool.
But I felt cool.
And then you didn't feel cool.
Exactly.
And then it was a problem. It was a problem when you didn't feel cool.
All I'm saying is that cool is a mindset.
Cool, it's a mindset.
Cool is a mindset.
It's a choice.
And so if you feel cool, and actually the good thing is when you start feeling cool, other people start seeing you as cool. Or at least you think they start seeing you.
You think they see you as cool, which makes you feel cool.
Right.
And that's a win.
But there are some people that actually they think that people think that they're cool, but they don't. Like people don't think they're cool.
Right. Yeah. But they don't know that.
But
their experience is still of being cool.
Right.
They have the same experience whether or not people think they're cool, unless their experience is the same whether or not people actually think they are cool.
Right.
Even if people think they're not cool, if they think people think they are cool,
then
it's the same as people actually think of them as cool.
Which just shows what is reality.
Perception.
There's reality. Is there even objective reality at that point of what is cool? Because if you think that something is cool, that's completely subjective. I guess like you could meet someone and be like, they're really cool, but they could be a completely different standard of what society or culture would deem as cool, right? There's no objective cool, is there?
No, I don't think so. Unless you're talking about temperature wise. Maybe.
Is that even
objective? Is there an objective line where when someone goes from lukewarm to cool?
I don't even think that's objective because then you get on weather. It says that it's 60 degrees outside, but it feels like 45.
Yeah. That's what my weather app says.
Yeah.
It says it's 80 degrees. Feels like 78.
Which shows that even the weather isn't objective, guys. Come on.
I know. What is up with subjective weather reports?
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Don't you go to them to get the objective weather? What's the temperature today?
Yeah, how am I supposed to know what to wear if it's 60 degrees outside, but you say it feels like 40?
Do I go? You might need a new weather app or something. I don't know.
And that's who determines what it feels like?
I don't know. That's the other question.
So why should I trust someone else's
subjective opinion of the temperature? It feels like it's 60 today.
I'm getting discouraged, man.
They probably have two different weather reporters. One person's standing outside, one person's inside reading the actual report.
Right.
Someone's outside and they tell them what it feels like. Hey guys, down here in sunny Southern California, Marietta, it feels about 72 degrees.
So you have actual science, and then you just have some guy standing out in the field. Man, I don't know. It feels about, I guess, 74 degrees outside now.
That's probably what's going on.
Dang.
I mean, that's my first assumption, but
right. Dang, that's actually so funny. Anyway, welcome to our 9th episode. You know how we like to start. We like to start with talking about something that has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
So nice.
So if you've made it to this part of the podcast, you realize that now we're actually going to talk about what we want to talk about. We're doing a 2-part series on fear, which is something that we've all have dealt with, all have struggled with. I know personally, fear is like, been a crazy part of my life, overcoming fear and stepping into victory from fear. And so fear has like a lot of different aspects about it. Probably we could do, if we really went in depth and did a full study through fear, we probably could do, we could have a whole podcast on fear, probably overcoming fear, because fear manifests itself in so many different ways.
Right.
But we did just want to, start out with just a 2-part series about the first part just being what is actually the biology of fear? How does our mind actually, embrace fear or deal with fear, or why our brain causes fear in our bodies? What's the actual response? Because we believe that if we can understand fear, maybe a little bit more about how it actually happens in our body, it might lead us to take steps to overcoming fear. That knowledge can actually help us make different decisions than our mind going crazy and causing us a lot of fear. So, And then the second episode, we're going to go into the forms of fear, anxiety, shame, and we can talk deeper about those things. But we do want to start off this podcast by talking about what is the brain actually doing. So, I'll let Daryl take this one off.
When I think about fear and what's happening, I think we don't process it. Even if we learn about it, we don't necessarily, in the middle of being afraid, aren't thinking about what's happening inside of our body, usually.
No.
It's like this automatic response that tells everything inside of us to avoid something or to move towards something, to do something. And language that's been used is hijacking.
Yes.
That it's like our brain is being hijacked by something. And even if we don't want to feel this way and feel like these things, or we're feeling all the anxiety, the stress, or wanting to change, wanting to be different, we aren't necessarily in control of that.
Right.
Because our brain is being hijacked by the amygdala, which is this tiny part of your brain towards the stem. It's one of the most core parts of your brain. Somebody uses the example of if you have your hand open up and you close your hand, but you close your thumb first and fold your fingers on top of it. The amygdala is your thumb underneath the rest of your brain, and then the 4 fingers are your frontal cortex, the part that's responsible for reasoning and logic, and the decision making that we make when we are weighing out pros and cons. The part of our brain that responds first is the amygdala,
right,
and that reacts faster. It receives signals quicker, and it responds before the frontal cortex even has a chance to start thinking about whether or not we should be afraid, whether or not we should react a certain way, or if it's worth being afraid of, or if it's even a real thing, or if it's just a perceived fear. The amygdala sends out an immediate response. Right. And so I was reading this book called Emotional Intelligence 2.0, and the author is talking about the development of the brain even. And when we're really, really little, like babies, and our brain's still developing, because our brain develops until we are in our 20s. And when we're so young, our amygdala is formed, but our hippocampus, which is the part of our brain that's largely responsible for remembering certain episodes of our life, the hippocampus has not been developed yet. And so our amygdala is having these experiences through our body where we're receiving signals, and it's getting stress, and our amygdala sends out stress hormones to our body so that we could have that fight or flight response. And our amygdala can remember and retain certain experiences, but we don't have the hippocampus to draw upon to actually remember what those experiences was. Like
Right.
if I were to try to recreate, whenever I was really little, this dog was barking really loud, and and then I saw it bite somebody. I might not be able to draw upon that memory, but my amygdala, without me even being aware of it, knows the experience of this dog barking loudly, biting somebody, and my brain has cut that off for me, and I can't draw upon that, but I might have this terrible
Right.
fear of dogs that I don't know where it came from.
Right.
But it could be because I had an experience that my hippocampus wasn't developed enough to actually remember and capture.
Right.
So this fear has such a primitive and basic and such a fundamental role in us as people and humans.
Right.
It has a role, and I think its primary function is survival. Right? We're trying to survive, so it's hot-wired to see a possible threat, a possible danger, and turn on our adrenaline. It sends signals to send out adrenaline to our body. Cortisol is our stress hormone, goes out into our body. Our heart rate pumps, starts going, and we start breathing heavier.
Right.
The blood starts going away from the extremities and starts going more and away from our digestive system, away from the frontal cortex of the brain.
It's all protection.
It's all protection. It's all like going into survival mode. And so our frontal cortex is no longer even really a part of the process once it starts taking over. And then our body is just thinking, okay, how do I survive this?
Right. So basically, you can blame your amygdala for ever feeling triggered.
Yeah.
If you have a conversation with somebody, or I don't know, you're afraid of spiders or something like that, your amygdala, before you even get a chance to allow your frontal cortex to process it logically about what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, those kind of things, your amygdala is immediately sending right? A firework of different signals connected to the different memories that you've had. So then you can get an immediate emotional response of fear that causes you to go into fight or flight mode. And we've talked about this a lot, about the idea of which has been huge in my journey of like overcoming fear as well, is the protection mode, right?
Yeah.
Where your brain is it's primitively trying to protect you from a immediate danger, whether that danger is real or it's imagined. There's that funny phrase that's like, fear is false evidence appearing real,
Yeah.
And so even if it's not real, fear is definitely a real thing. If a lion's in front of you, you want to be running away from that thing or fighting that thing. You go into fight or flight, or you freeze and you just let it eat you, I guess.
You freeze and you hope that it's no longer entertained by the idea of eating you.
Right, exactly. You freeze, you pretend that you're dead, and then it will walk away. But I don't know. Anyway, I think they can smell fear, lions. That's so I've heard.
Yeah. I've heard that there's certain things like things that you can release that when you're afraid. I don't know if it's for people or for animals, but I know like skunks obviously release a scent. Pheromones. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I remember hearing bees smell fear too.
Dude, okay, I had an experience with a bee, just real quick.
I have no idea how true that is. I've never looked into that. Okay, sorry.
Daryl is a professional beekeeper. But I went up to this spot, and there was this bee that was flying around me, and I just kept trying to walk away from this bee, and it just kept coming closer and closer, and I was like, stop, dude, you're about to get wrecked, dude. I was getting so angry. And you know how people get all afraid of bees? The bees flying around because they don't want to get stung, right? And it seems like the bees just stay. So what I did instead, when the bee was coming towards me, instead of keeping like trying to walk away from it, I just stood my ground. I stood right there. The bee was so close to me, was flying around my face, flying around here, and then just flew past me and flew away. And I was like, heck yeah.
Facing your fear.
I showed that bee who was boss. Anyway, which we might get into later, stepping into fear. But yeah, there's those immediate triggers that we can jump into, those primitive responses that fear becomes, whether it's real or whether it's imagined, it causes all of this response in our bodies, and I think understanding the way that our body does us allows us to not just act in that fear, right? Or not to just step into that fear, but maybe take a step back and realize, okay, what is actually happening in my body? What is my mind, grabbing a hold of? What are these, what is this connection? Like, why did I just get afraid from just, hearing water drop in the shower? Or, or why did I get afraid just because they said this one word that reminded me of, this crazy thing that happened in the past or whatever,
Yeah, I was just looking up the top 5 fears in the world. And I'm going to pull it up real quick again. But there was a list of the top 5 fears. One of them is
Speaking in public.
is fear of dogs.
Really?
Yep. 4 is fear of situations where escape is difficult.
What? Really?
Yeah. So this can lead people to avoid all sorts of different situations. Open spaces, crowded places, etc. It can even be so severe that people don't want to leave their homes, which is kind of crazy because then it's like they never escape their house. They're so afraid of being somewhere they can't escape that they never actually leave their house. They
hey, that's a word right there.
That's a word.
Yo.
Number 3 is fear of heights. 2 is fear of snakes. 1 is fear of spiders.
Really?
These are the most common phobias according to some UK website.
No, the UK is different, man. America's different.
I think in America, it's usually fear of death, fear of public speaking.
Fear of public speaking, yeah. I would imagine that would be like at least top 3.
Yeah.
People are terrified of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's another one that I looked at that was common. It was the fear of storms,
right.
Thunderstorms, lightning, thunderstorms. It actually could be
astrophobia.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There was another variation of that. That was the fear of man-made satellites falling from space.
Dude, there's weird fears.
I remember learning about that fear in my 2010 book of, I don't know, it was like book of things.
What?
It was this list of like all the top 10. It was the top 10.
Right.
Top 10 of 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the top 10 fears. Was
the fear of falling satellites.
Man-made satellites falling from space.
Jeez.
Yeah, so it's a real phobia. But why do we develop these fears?
Right.
I think some of that has been explained through research. I don't know if every single phobia can be explained this way, like that one, for example. I don't know how that fear would develop. Maybe it's just from watching something and developing a fear of it.
Right.
But conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one of the ways that it's important to talk about when we're talking about what is fear is how fear develops, and conditioning is a big part of that. So conditioned fears. There was a study of a little baby, and they had this baby. They put a white bunny next to this baby, not a real bunny. It was like a stuffed animal.
Right.
And this baby would go to the bunny, and every time the baby touched the bunny, they would make this loud sound that would scare the baby. So the baby would be really scared every time it touched the bunny. And so the baby eventually would not touch the bunny. And then it developed this fear of anything that was white and fluffy.
Jeez.
They had real bunnies, they had other things that they would put there. But this baby developed this fear because every time the baby went to go touch this white fluffy thing, this sound set off the amygdala inside of its body, which released all the stress hormones, the adrenaline, and this feeling of this is bad, I need to survive, right? And so the conditioning of that fear, this sound tied in with this fluffy bunny, made the baby afraid of the fluffy bunny. Right. There's this other study, we just watched this video about the mice, where the mice would be shocked on its foot, experience an electric shock, and develop this fear of this shock, right? Which makes sense because it's painful. And so obviously the mouse wants to avoid the shock.
Right.
Now, what they did is they started pairing the shock with a sound, a musical sound. And so the music would happen and the shock would happen at the same time. One of those things are harmful. One of those things are not harmful. Right. It's it's just a sound.
A neutral stimulus, they called it, right?
Yeah, a neutral stimulus. There's a negative stimulus happening at the same time as a neutral stimulus.
Right.
And so the mouse became afraid of the sound because the sound would happen and it would get shocked at the same time.
Right.
Now, eventually, this is kind of like Pavlov's dog, where they...
What's Pavlov's dog?
Pavlov's dog is the dog where they would ring a bell and feed it. Ring a bell, feed it. Eventually, they'd ring the bell and the dog would come to eat, but there'd be no food there. Right? It would start salivating. So when the dog would eat, it would salivate. Right. They'd ring the bell, the dog would eat and salivate at the same time. Right. Eventually, the dog wasn't even eating, it was just salivating from the sound. Right. Because it was conditioned.
Yeah, conditioning.
So this mouse, it would receive the shock and the sound, then they would take the shock away and just play the sound, and the mouse would have the same experience inside of it that it did when it got shocked. So it'd have that release of adrenaline, that release of cortisol, and those signals saying this is a bad situation, right? And that was conditioning fear.
Right.
And associative fear as well. So now this sound was associated with this negative thing, even though the sound itself was not negative.
Right.
I've seen someone train their dog this way, which is not with a shock, but with a loud sound.
Right.
Where they train the dog not to pass this line, and they just smash this trash can on the ground every time the dog went up to the line.
Right.
So the dog would never go past the line. Sometimes you'd run up to the line and just bark at the line. But because inside the dog had this experience that was attached to this, this thing that it was associating this negative experience with.
Right.
And so fear happens often, I think, in that same type of situation. So if we're in a storm and something bad happens while we're in the storm that's separate from the storm, that could happen at any time.
Right.
Our hippocampus and our amygdala can tie those two events together and think that they are the same.
Right.
So now I'm afraid of storms because every time I was in a storm, this negative thing would happen, or at least I correlated those things together.
That happened to me with hot dogs.
With hot dogs? Oh, tell us more.
When I was in 6th grade, I went to a movie night, and they had a 6th grade movie night, Chevalin Middle School, classic Chevalin Middle School, and they were watching. I can't do two things. I can't eat hot dogs, and I can't ever watch Wallace and Gromit ever again, because
do those things happen at the same time?
And I can't eat Lay's original chips. Yeah,
wow, okay,
crazy. So and I'm sure a lot of us had this experience where you just had a bad experience with food, and you like look at the food now and it's just disgusing.
I've always wondered why you never ate Lay's.
Yeah,
it's been in the back of my mind this whole time.
I've been friends with you for this long, and you've never ate Lay's original chips in front of me. But in 6th grade, I probably had like 3 hot dogs and 4 bags of original Lay's chips, 2 Cokes, and I was watching Wallace and Gromit.
I feel like I know where this is going.
Yeah, it was terrible. Basically, I went home. I was like, hey, what's up, guys, to my family? And I threw up all night. It was terrible. Dang. I was in the bathroom all night, just terrible. And since that day, I haven't been able to... Like, I can eat a hot dog. I can still do Coke. Coke is fine. But with hot dogs, like, I literally get like a can't do hot dogs. Lay's original chips, they're like the grossest chips ever. But it was all because it was tied to that poor experience, that shock or whatever, like the mice was experiencing, to those things. And then immediately that night, I associated Wallace and Gromit. It makes me sick to watch claymation.
Dang. Yeah.
Wow. But it's just like, it's a way, it honestly like makes me feel kind of like nauseous to look at it. And the way claymation is done, it's already like all weird and stuff. Okay. So I associate that with nausea. Okay. That is my storm. Okay. But,
so you can't watch any claymation?
No, I probably could. I'm willing to step into my fears, but
but you've had to grow into that point and watching claymation.
But I have to grow back into that point. And Wallace and Gromit brings back immediately when I think of that movie, Wallace and Gromit, or claymation, when I think of Lay's original chips, when I see hot dogs, it reminds me back to that night that I just threw up all night.
Wow.
And so all of those things are tied together. So it's kind of crazy that we could have an emotional experience, or just a poor experience in any part of our lives. I think we talked about like the being scared of water before we started recording. You could be at a beach and see something terrible happen at a beach, and it didn't even necessarily have to be like you almost drowned or you were in the water or saw someone drown, but you were just by water or by the beach, and you saw something terrible happen. You saw someone, get in a fight or an argument, or maybe your parents, like you're split up at that moment or whatever. And that actually, you tied the beach or the water with that emotional experience, with that fear or that loss, that lack, that scarcity, whatever you felt in that moment. And that creates a memory in the hippocampus that gets, that can get stored there, that you're not even thinking that's getting stored, or you block it out because your brain does that as well to protect you from remembering those things, right? So you might not even remember the moment where your parents, got in an argument at the beach, but you can't go to the beach because you're scared of the water, right?
Right.
Which can also be poor, because then you start misidentifying your actual fears.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which can be real dangerous. So meanwhile, when you think that you're afraid of, going into the water, you're really afraid of loss, or that memory is actually tied in something deeper than just going into the ocean, or being buried in the sand or something like that.
Yeah.
So identifying, because I think identifying the fear is something, it's one of the first things that psychologists, counselors bring you to when you're struggling with fear is, okay, let's identify the actual fear here.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can't move past, you can't get rid of something that you haven't identified yet.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, when we live, and it's kind of unfortunate because I feel like a lot of us live from those natural instincts and don't actually take time to reflect and see, where is these things coming from, right? Anger builds up, or fear builds up, or insecurity builds up, and we're just we just act out of those things, which is unfortunate. But the first thing that they'll tell you to do is, okay, let's actually identify what the fear actually is in experiencing this, and then they'll bring you through other things. But if you're misidentifying it as, this is my fear of the beach or whatever, you're kind of living in this thing that your brain has created, this idea that your brain has created. We talked about memories in episode 4, right? That you're creating this false narrative or this false memory, and then living in fear because of that thing, right? And so it could be this spiral of things. So that's why it's important to understand what your brain is doing when you're experiencing those fear responses.
Yeah,
right.
And there's a study in UCLA that we just heard, and I was looking some stuff up, and whenever people were able to put language to their fear, when they were able to name what they're experiencing and name the thing they're afraid of, they're more likely to be able to cope with it. Because what that did is, often whenever we're experiencing fear, it's the amygdala that's taking over, right? The small base part of our brain that is faster, it's more primitive, and it reacts quicker. It's really driven to make us survive.
Is that a part of the reptilian brain then?
Yeah, people will call it the reptilian brain.
Right.
People will say that's
the
like
animal brain.
That's your reptilian brain or animal brain. Yeah. Right. If you look at the different layers, but yeah, so that part of the brain is essentially hijacking you in that moment,
right?
Where you're not thinking logically about whether or not this is worth being afraid of, or whether or not, or what actually is the real threat or real fear here. Your brain is just trying to survive,
right? And
so whenever people were able to identify and put language to what they're afraid of happening, it started to reconnect their frontal cortex, where they can start thinking a little bit more logically about it. Whenever they were practicing bringing rationality back into their fear,
right?
It allowed that connection to be reestablished, so it wasn't just hijacked by the amygdala,
right?
And I think that's a difficult thing to do in the middle of being afraid, in the middle of a fear.
Mm-hmm.
But there was one of the techniques was, well, I forgot what was it called? There were 2 techniques that can be used sometimes to help people get past phobias. One of them is like very immersive, just high exposure. You just put them in a room full of this thing that they're afraid of.
Full of clowns, if you're afraid of clowns.
A room full of clowns until,
right?
I don't know if they just make them sit there until they're not afraid anymore.
Right.
But it's a way of disassociating. It's so being inside this room full of clowns until I realize these clowns aren't going to hurt me. Right. Mm-hmm. And I might be really anxious and really terrified and freaking out at first, but eventually, as long as everything continues to stay the same, I'll start drawing a disconnection between the clown and whatever I'm afraid of, like the mouse and the music and the electricity. Right. If the mouse heard the music over and over again without being shocked, eventually, the level of panic and the level of anxiety that the mouse would experience started decreasing every time I heard the music, because it started realizing, oh, okay, so I'm not getting shocked.
Right.
And at some point, the mouse would be okay. It'd be fine. I would have no sign of being anxious, no sign of being stressed, as long as it continually heard the music without the shock.
Right.
So there's that method where you just fully expose yourself to the fear. And get your maximum dose of anxiety and stress in a moment,
or slowly expose it,
or the slow exposure, the slow desensitization.
Yeah.
Yes, there it is. Where they have people study it first, read a book about it, then look at it from a distance where it's a safe space, and then eventually move closer and closer where they can be okay with being in the same room as it. Right.
Right.
And those are 2 different methods of desensitization. Jeez. Desensitization.
Yeah, desensitization.
Where you're no longer sensitive to that in the same way. Where you start separating the actual thing that's worth being afraid of from the thing that you've connected your fear to. Right? Where if you're highly driven to be afraid of thunderstorms, okay, maybe it's not the thunderstorm that's the issue. Right? What is it that I'm afraid of? Why am I feeling anxiety in this thunderstorm? And learning that thunderstorms can be peaceful. They can be neutral.
Right.
Whereas again, shocked, obviously. If you're afraid of being electrocuted by a lightning bolt,
then you're going to be
You might want to be inside the house while you're trying to get used to being in thunderstorms, right? Then maybe eventually you'll be able to go outside during a storm. But these fears can stop us from experiencing what beauty there is in certain things. Right? Like claymation. There are some wonderful claymation movies, like the Rudolph movie.
That's the one you're going to name? The Rudolph movie?
The Rudolph Christmas movie. You know what I'm talking about?
Honestly, probably one of the top 10 of all time in movies.
Puts the black clay over his red nose because he tries to blend in.
Oh, jeez. That's truth right there, man.
Yeah, he's trying to blend in with the other reindeer, but then his nose just glows and it pops off. He can't help but be himself.
Yeah, heck yeah.
But these the different claymation movies, for example. If we're afraid of seeing the claymation movie because of an experience that we're attaching to it, then we might be missing out on the good experiences that are there. And so being able to identify and understand what's going on and put language to what it is that we're afraid of happening might help reconnect our amygdala and our frontal cortex, our whole brain, put our whole brain back into process, regain control when our amygdala is hijacking.
I think that's something important of what you said. Fear is a liar. It is. It's a liar. It sucks, and it totally hijacks joy. It hijacks peace. It keeps you from doing the things that you want to do. Fear of failure, fear of not being good enough, fear of being judged, fear of little things or whatever. Fear of heights will keep you from going on like an amazing hike to see an amazing sunset. There's tons of different things that fear keeps us. And what you mentioned earlier, the dog training, where it's like the dog there's not even a wall there. It's not like the dog couldn't pass that line, but they had been conditioned to, if they crossed the line, the giant, trash can would bash, and they didn't like that sound, or that sound scared them. And so they'll come up to the line and bark at the line, even though, they could be a big...
The line was no threat to them.
Exactly. That there was nothing there.
Yeah.
And I think that is something incredibly important, is the embracing of fear. Like the towing the line a little bit and stepping up and just being like, putting your hand through it, just be like, is there actually a wall here? And I think oftentimes we can settle to live behind that false wall of fear, because we've been conditioned to, because that's how we, grew up, because that's what our environment was, because of these different experiences, right? And to question your fears, I think is really important.
Yeah, that's good.
To question, why is this fear here? Is this actually scary, right? And what you're talking about, like what you just said, is you're getting yourself back into your own logical mind, into actually thinking about, okay, why am I actually afraid of this? What does this actually have to do with? What is the actual root of this fear? I don't want to just live from a primordial mindset, from the reptilian brain sending all these signals and then living out of a place where I'm not actually thinking deeply about what I'm actually afraid of in order to overcome those things. I think the problem is, though, too, that those instinctive emotions are a whole lot stronger. At least it feels like, at least what I've experienced, a whole lot stronger. The experience of fear, the feeling of fear, is a whole lot stronger than thinking about fear, or thinking about what you're going through. And what you're talking about, where it's like that reptilian brain or the amygdala kind of takes over logic, where you're actually not thinking in the other parts of your brain. It kind of takes over your brain. I think that's hard to deal with. right?
Yeah.
Because the experience of fear, that becomes the reality by which we live, and then that can actually become the truth about the matter. Right?
Yeah,
It feels a whole lot more like the truth. It feels more like the reality because it is so instinctual to live from that place, to live from a place of survival,
Yeah.
And so I think it's a tough journey to kind of come up to that line and maybe take a step over the line because we have developed probably, I would say, most of the truths in our lives based off of those primordial feelings, right? Mm-hmm. Based off of those instinctual emotions, those instinctual fears, what our brain and our subconscious are doing behind the scenes without us even knowing. That is a large part of what has made us afraid or not afraid of what we are today,
right. Yeah.
And so it is a scary thing to come up to that place and to question those feelings that are very strong, and it's just tough work. It's really tough work.
I think questioning it is a good place to start.
Right.
I think that was a good idea, a good suggestion, is to question the fear.
Right.
Is this, what am I afraid of right now?
Right.
Asking what am I afraid of right now? Mm-hmm. And then asking, is it worth being afraid, or what's the likelihood of this happening?
Right.
And questioning the whatever fundamental assumptions that are supporting the fear. Mm-hmm. Because I think that if we're afraid of something, we're assuming that there's potential harm in this situation, right? So questioning, what is that assumption based on? Right? What is this actually based on? Is this going to be something that is closely tied to reality, or is it something that is far from reality and not anywhere near what is actually going on right now? Am I just afraid of this happening eventually, or and questioning the basis of our fear?
Right.
There is often this analogy whenever I hear people talk about fear, and the function of fear is the rustling in the bushes, that our ancestors would have experienced. And then they would have experienced sometime that rustling in the bushes meant some kind of predator. They're trying to survive. And so if they haven't experienced there's a predator in the bushes, every time they hear a rustle in the bushes, she's talking today. Every time they have this, hear this sound, they have the same experience, anxiety, get ready to fight, I need to survive.
Right.
And maybe it was their kid hiding in the bush, right? And if over and over again, they start realizing, okay, every sound in the bush doesn't mean it's an animal trying to eat me.
Right.
Right. So they can break that assumption and think, but what's happening is I hear a sound, I'm assuming that's an animal trying to eat me.
Right.
That's like the first thing I jump to.
Right.
Where
it's the assumption.
Right, that gets us going. And whenever we hold on to those assumptions and continue and preserve those assumptions, I think that fear persists.
Right.
It continues on. Mm-hmm. And when we can question those assumptions that we have underlying the fear, that we can start possibly changing our experience.
Right. I think the scary thing about even questioning your fear is that you have to get close to it to question it.
Yeah, and you have to also accept the possible reality that it's true.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So it's a whole lot easier, quote unquote, to run away from your fear, right? To have a fight or flight response to it and just live from those places of just like, fight, flight, or freeze, than to actually step into that fear and understand I could get the answer I'm not looking for.
Right.
I have to be open to actually saying, I'm actually terrified of not being enough, or I'm actually terrified of this, or this is actually a real thing in my life that I need to get rid of, or, and you have to be open. That takes so much courage, so much courage, to step into that place, to be open to that fear. And to actually question. Did I tell you about the snake? No. I don't know if we've said it on the podcast yet, but I have this spot in La Cresta. It's by Marietta in California. If you're listening in the UK, or I think we have a couple of listeners in Denmark, or all my Baghdad people. Anyway, so I go to this one place in La Cresta. I'll take my bike up there, and there's it's almost like a potato chip rock. You know what? Have you ever heard of potato chip rock? It's like this flat rock out. It's not nearly as big, but it's just this flat rock. And I've gone up there a couple times I don't usually sit on that one, but there was one day that I went up there, and you kind of have to climb through brush and stuff like that. There's no path up to it, but I'll get up there and I'll just like sit crisscross and just meditate, and I'll just meditate, talk to Jesus, and it's just a good spot. But so I was, the day before I had gone on a hike with our friends Heather's kids, and a hiker came down and he said, "Oh, guys, be careful on your hike up. Like there's a snake like on the way." And so we're like, "Oh, there's a snake, no problem," right? And so we just keep going, and then I start realizing, man, I'm with kids, or maybe that just became my excuse because I started getting scared that there was a snake up there. So I was like, "Okay, guys, maybe we should just stay right here. We won't go, any further because there's a snake." So the next day, go up to this potato chip rock type of thing to go and meditate, and so I take it, and while I'm traveling up, this fear comes into my mind: what if there's a snake in the brush? And I'm like, I don't know. What if there's a snake in the brush, And so I'm like, kind of like going through a little heavy, making sure there's no snake, getting uppity. And I finally get up to the rock, and I sit down on the rock, and I'm trying to just be present, I'm trying to get Goose Frabud out, and I'm trying to, I'm just trying to come into the moment, spend time with Jesus. But in the back of my head, it's like, shh, it's like, what if there's a snake? Right. What if there's a snake? What if there's a snake? Every little, rush of wind or something like that, it's like, is there a snake behind me? Or like, the brush behind me kind of making movements. Yeah, it's like, totally. Is there a snake behind me, right? And so what I had to do to overcome that is say, what if there is a snake? I think I'd be okay with that. Nice. And I actually had to embrace the fact that there might be a snake, but I can't worry about if there's a snake. I almost had to become present with the reality that a snake could come up and it could bite me, and I came to the fact of like, but I think I'd be okay. And then I just became present after that. And there was no snake, right?
Right. And then you never actually saw a snake.
I never actually saw a snake. It was all in my mind, right? It was the false evidence appearing real, right? I had this idea because of what happened yesterday that there was a snake up in the brush. I had this other idea, there might be a snake here too, right? And it could bite me. It could be poisonous. I might have to. So I actually had to come back to the reality of, man, I could be, I am afraid of a snake being there, and there could be a snake, but I can't really do anything about that now, and I want to be present in this moment. So I have to come to terms with the reality that a snake might bite me, and that I might need help after that, But when I came to that reality of that fear of just saying, actually embracing the fear into question, is that something I need to be thinking about right now? What would that actually mean if there was a snake? And actually not just go to the worst case scenario. There's a boa constrictor behind me, and it is trying to wrap itself around me to squeeze out the life of me, right? Come to that reality, and sometimes psychologists, it's a way of exposure and fear as well, is to go to the worst possible outcome, to actually think logically about like, what would this actually mean if this happened, right? Yeah. And then that kind of brings you into a state of acceptance, right? Of that there might be the snake, right? But that helps with all of those, all those emotions going on, fight or flight. Oh God, is there something? Everything becomes that. But rather just coming back to that place where you start thinking about your fear and embracing your fear, which is a scary thing to do. Again, to step into those things and to say there might be one,
Yeah. But if we can think about it and then come to terms with it.
Right.
Be okay with it. Mm-hmm. I think that I found it easier to think about the reality and think, okay, that might happen, but it might not. Right. Rather than thinking about it and focusing all my energy to avoid this thing. I used to be terribly afraid of being misunderstood. I don't know where it came from exactly. I don't have like a specific time that I felt misunderstood. Oh Lord, and like it was please don't let me be misunderstood. But I used to always want to make sure I didn't seem like somebody misunderstand what I was saying. Right. So I was always super careful with what I was going to say, or I just wouldn't say anything because I didn't want it to be taken the wrong way. Right. And I just had to accept, I'm probably going to be misunderstood sometimes. Right. And if that happens, it's not going to be that big of a deal. Right. And then I can explain myself if I need to, or if I don't get the chance to, then well, that's okay. Right. I had to think about the possibility of it happening and think, okay, that could happen. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. It's not like every time I say something, I'm going to be misunderstood. Right. But I might be misunderstood, and that's okay. Right. It's not worth me never trying to explain myself because I'm afraid somebody's going to misunderstand me. Exactly. Because then I'll never be understood. Exactly. Right. You know what I mean?
No, exactly. Because you'll never actually have a conversation with somebody because you're afraid of being misunderstood. You're never going to be actually understood.
Yeah.
Right. So your fear, fear is, oh gosh, I hate fear. But it's one of those false things that we talked about, I think in one of our other episodes too, the double agents, right? Fear's that double agent because it keeps you from the very thing that you want. So you're using fear to keep you from not being misunderstood, which causes you to be misunderstood because you're not willing to have a conversation with somebody or to express your feelings because you're afraid of being misunderstood.
Yeah.
So no one really understands you or understand what Daryl thinks about something because you're afraid that no one's going to understand you. But instead of stepping out of that fear and actually conveying your own ideas, your opinions, your values to other people so that people could understand you, you can't just have good without the bad.
Yeah.
Right. It's the yin and the yang, I guess, like you can't step out of fear. What am I trying to say here? Basically, you have to accept the fullness of life, the wholeheartedness of life. Right? So you have to understand that you could be misunderstood and you have to understand that. In order to be understood, I need to talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was, I was talking with my wife yesterday and what I realized is that when I was talking to her about something that I don't want to live based on the what ifs. Right. Don't live based on the what ifs. Not going to make all my decisions based on the what ifs and what could happen and what if this happens or what if they think this or what if this happens this way, but live on what is. So like what do I know is for sure right now. Mm-hmm. And let's live based off of that. And if I discover more things as I go along, then I can change my course. I can make a different decision. I can live a different way. But if I just live based on what if, I'm thinking about all kinds of possibilities, and I'm missing out on what is right now.
Exactly.
So I don't know what this person's thinking. I don't know what this outcome is going to be, but I do know that this is what it is right now.
Like I'm missing out on the meditation on my favorite rock and my favorite spot in La Cresta.
Right.
If I'm focusing on the what if there's a snake.
Yeah. Totally. Mm-hmm. And not focusing on the what ifs, but what is, and trying to make a decision and live there.
Exactly. Yeah. That's really good. I think what you were saying earlier about those oh gosh, what were you talking about? Oh my gosh, I'm gonna miss it. About stepping into those, oh my goodness. My brain just
Your brain on?
Your brain on? Oh my gosh, I cannot think what you were talking about. Let's recap.
Maybe we can talk about it in the next episode.
Yeah. Maybe we can talk about it in the next episode. But I do think it's important to step into those little moments. That the what is super important, right? To come back into that place. Again, that comes back to the being present in that moment, embracing the pain. Oh, this is what I was going to talk about. I got it. This is going to be for this episode. I got it. We were talking about before we started recording that you kind of have to come to these terms in emotional healthy spirituality. We were reading like you have to accept, this guy named Richard Rohr says like you have to accept like a couple facts about life. One of those is that you're going to die.
Right.
And that there's going to be pain, and accepting those things allows you to actually step into fear rather than trying to run away from fear.
Yeah.
And I think that is the beautiful part about the gospel that I've been realizing as well, is that like Jesus came to free us from the fear of death.
Yeah.
Which is like, and in life, it's not just about death and whole physical death, but in death, in life, we have so many mini deaths that we go through. And we use fear to protect us from those mini deaths, right? So the death of a relationship, or the death of intimacy somewhere, or the death of our ego, right? The death of our pride, the death of our integrity, and so we use fear to keep us away from these mini deaths inside of our life. And so coming back to that acceptance, we have to accept that things throughout life they're gonna die. But even you could see in nature itself, right? In the way that our planet is organized, is that things die and new life comes, right? That's the whole point of seasons, right? And, even just setting people, like fires are actually good for different valleys and stuff like that, because the fires burn down the old and it brings in the new. So it's important to know to embrace those deaths in life. right?
Yeah.
So that new things can come. And I think that's a huge tactic for understanding fear is like your brain is trying to protect you and trying to allow you to survive. But what if I don't need to protect myself in that way? You know, what if that's the question too on a deeper level? Hey, brain, why are you trying to protect me from this relationship breaking apart? What if it does? Then new life will come from that.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
It'll be new life.
And then the acceptance from that kind of rids the fear of its power because you're accepting, yeah, this relationship could work out or it could not work out. Yeah, my parents could stay together or they could not stay together. I'm still hoping that they stay together, right?
Right, yeah,
but the embracing of the both that could happen, it's like Radshak, Meshach, and Abednego, right?
Yeah.
Going into the furnace in Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar's going to throw him in the furnace, and they didn't say like they did say God will deliver us from this fire, but he says, but then they say, but even if he doesn't, we're still
not going to worship you.
We're still not going to worship you. We're still not going to worship this gold statue of you. We're not going to bow to you. We serve the Lord. And so even if God doesn't save us, you just throw us in the fire. Right. And then when they go in the fire, that's when the fourth man is noticed. There's a fourth man and he's shining like the Son of Man or whatever in the fire with them. And then that is the purifying thing. So I think that, and that all comes back to the psychological approach of exposing yourself to something, desensitization, right? Where it's like you actually embrace, man, in a real sense, I could die, you know? And then being like, you know, and that's why the gospel is so good because it's like, that's okay.
Yeah.
I actually could. And actually certain things in my life, I do want them to die. So if actually embracing this fear and stepping into those exposures of those scary things in my life is actually the answer to actually growing and new things growing in my life, now I'm not trying to protect myself anymore. I'm actually open in vulnerability to be blessed, but also to be hurt.
Right. Yeah.
Right. To have relationships work out, but also for them to not, to live and also to die.
To not be afraid of pain.
Yeah. To experience great joy and also great pain. And when you allow yourself to experience the fullness of life, the wholeheartedness of life, right? To experience peace and confusion, you know, answers and questions, all of those things, the wholeness, then fear starts to lose its place because often fear, we're just trying to control those outcomes to be towards the more positive end instead of embracing the full picture of what life is, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's really helpful.
Me too.
Any last thoughts, Tyrell?
No, I think that's it for now.
That's it.
That was it. Yeah.
Awesome, guys. Well, thank you for joining us for our first part of our 2-part series on fear. Next week, we'll be talking about kind of the forms of fear, anxiety, and shame, and how fear actually manifests in our lives, which I think is going to be awesome. Make sure that you follow us on Spotify, on iTunes, subscribe on YouTube. We got an Instagram page called Your Brain on God. We might be opening up a Twitter. I don't know. We could do anything at this point, right?
Anything.
Yeah. Well, we got merch coming out for you guys. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be incredible. Indeed. All right, guys. Well, we love you so much. Thanks for joining us on this 9th episode of Your Brain on God. Peace out.
Peace out.
See you next time.